I'm Darshan. I'm from Bangalore in India. I'm visiting Singapore for the first time after 15 years. I just flew in this morning and had a few meetings, found this meetup on meetup.com and thought it would be a great time to speak to local entrepreneurs and a good time to connect and understand what's happening in Singapore. So I have a background in finance and engineering. I used to work in a private equity fund based out of Mumbai in India. And just to give you a little context of the fund, it was a $4 billion fund that focused on the real estate sector, primarily funding Tier 1 developers in the residential real estate space in Bangalore, Mumbai and Delhi, which are the three biggest real estate markets. And in my stint, they were making about 24% per annum on their $4 billion, which is roughly $1 billion per year on their capital. And the investment team was 4 people, including me. And that number blew my mind. How is 4 people sitting in a nice, cushy office creating that kind of value? And when I really started to look at, okay, who's paying for this? Where is this money really coming from? It was fairly evident that it was coming at the cost of every potential home buyer. So essentially, if you were a developer in India in 2015 or 2016, you bought in or acquired your piece of land in 2011 or 2012 when it was a bull market there, and you forecasted that the bull market would peak when you would sell, and your life cycle of your project is 4 to 5 years. So by the time they were ready to sell their condos or apartments or whatever they were selling, it was at the middle of a bear market. So they had 2 options. They could either correct their sales price and effectively kill their margins, or they could get external capital to withstand the bear market and sell at the next bull run. So of course, they ended up picking the second, and what that essentially meant was the cost of capital where private equity funds would come in would result in the cost of the real estate property. And if you look at Mumbai as a city, I think it's probably the city with the most number of people without a housing situation, where it's just millions and millions of people staying in the slum. And we had an inventory overhang. Inventory overhang is a parameter to measure how poorly the real estate market is doing. That is, you check the total sales of real estate over a month, and you see what's the total number of unsold condos, and you divide the unsold numbers by total sales per month, and that gives you, okay, if there are no more apartments being built, how long is it going to take for the entire unsold properties to get sold? And that number was 50 months. So 50 months worth of real estate was unsold, and yet there are millions of people who didn't have housing, any sort of housing in Mumbai. So the second this was evident to me, I realized that I was on the right side of capitalism my entire life. And I trained to get into that firm for about 3 years, and I quit in 6 months. All this while, I realized that, okay, I like finance, I really, really like technology, and took a couple of months off, stayed in a monastery, and tried to figure out, try to disconnect from all the noise, and try to figure out where is disruption in finance really happening? Is there a way to build a better banking system? And it was fairly evident that blockchain stands to change a lot of the way things are done in the financial sector. And so with that realization, I came back, I started studying about the retail banking sector specifically. And when I said I was looking at the market opportunities and studying, I was really looking at what do the earliest adopters of blockchain and cryptocurrency specifically care about? What do they not care about? Is there something that they care about that's being met? Is there something that they care about that isn't being met to their level of expectations? And that's where the startup was really born. So we're called the Bank of Hodlers. The name is a little bit of an issue because the word bank is kind of regulated. But essentially we're replicating the experience of a retail bank through technology without being a centralized authority. So Uh, when we looked at retail banking specifically, there are a few primary use cases as to why people use the DBS and the HDFCs of the world, or the HSBCs of the world. And that is, they need a safe place to store their money. They need an easy and instantaneous way to pay for things. And third, if their capital is not being used, they'd like to make interest, or if they would like to get a line of credit, they can go to some place and do that. So it's storage, payments, and debt. And all of this can be done without the need of a centralized authority to exist, thanks to blockchain. It can finally be done. And with that realization in mind, we've started building our decentralized non-custodial products. And when I say non-custodial, I mean we don't actually own any of the assets that you would typically use on the platform. So today, if you used DBS, for example, you have a bank balance, right? And you don't really know. It's just a number that's displayed to you. You don't really know where that money really is. You don't know. Okay, if DBS gets into trouble, which happens more often than we'd like to believe, what exactly happens? Let's say they become insolvent. What happens to your money? Will you get it back? And unless the government bails you, the answer is no. Unless the government bails that bank, the answer is no. And that's a problem, don't you think? They take all the risk in the world because they have the upside of the risk. And if things go bad, unfortunately, their users either get to bear the brunt of it, or the government bails them out by printing money, essentially, where everybody is paying for it. So they have a free ride. They've had a free ride for about 100 years. And yeah, things deserve, I think we deserve better. And that's what we're trying to do here. Just give me a minute.
Screensaver.
Yeah. Okay. So the wave of customer centricity has skipped banking. And the system is designed by the few and it benefits the few. So we want to change that. We're trying to make banking easier and democratize the access to capital. And the three primary use cases I spoke about, that is storage, payments, and debt. We've gone ahead and built the whole layer for people to come on the platform and borrow and lend against their assets. So this is securitized borrowing and lending. So essentially, if you owned, let's say, a stock, a bond, a mutual fund, an index fund, or cryptocurrencies, you can come. We assess its risk based on its volatility, and we lock the asset up in a smart contract, so we don't have access to your funds. So even if something goes wrong with the firm, since it's on a smart contract, as long as those rules are followed between the two parties signing the contract, it happens anyway. And this is on a public blockchain. We don't control it. It's on a platform like Ethereum. So extremely reliable, distributed. There's an incentive structure for the smart contract to exist for the foreseeable future. Yeah. So as I mentioned today, you can either come to our platform as a lender or a borrower. We don't treat institutions or retail investors differently because products are designed better for, it works only if it's designed keeping an end customer in mind. And whether you're a lender as a person or an institution, it should work exactly the same way. If you'd like API access or, again, some sort of way to integrate it on your platform, that's of course built, but you can use the platform exactly in maybe 1 or 2 clicks and you can achieve this CTA. So if you own, let's say, a Bitcoin, for example, you've probably bought it for some reason. Let's say you bought 1 Bitcoin for simplicity of math. You don't intend to sell now, you intend to sell maybe 1 year later when the next bull market hits. So essentially, your 1 Bitcoin is lying in a wallet that's doing nothing. What you can do is, if you deposit it on this platform and you try to lock it in a smart contract, it gets lent out to somebody, and instead of you owning 1 Bitcoin, it essentially becomes 1.05 or 1.1 Bitcoin at the end of the smart contract, at the end of the tenure. So you actually make more money than what you initially thought you would. And as a lender, you may have bought, let's say, some other token and you want to borrow, let's say, Singapore dollar. You can come to the platform, you don't have to sell your underlying assets, and it's a way for you to get some sort of leverage. And since this is asset-backed, the rates are going to be significantly lower than, let's say, something like a home loan, or a personal finance loan, or a business loan, or an auto loan, or an education loan. It's going to be far lower than that. Once you pay back your principal plus interest owed, you get your underlying collateral back. There's nothing we can interfere, and since it's on the smart contract. So our target customer for the next 18 months is the quintessential early adopter. These are people who have tried the existing banking solutions out there, not particularly happy, they're content. Banks do enough for you to not be frustrated to move to another one. That's pretty much their bar of satisfaction that they go after. And yeah, it's an exciting opportunity for us for that reason. Yeah. So when we looked at debt over digital assets, specifically cryptocurrencies, you could say the market, so in 6 months of 2018, the transactions amounted to about $2 billion. And I've just picked up an example of one firm that's called MakerDAO. MakerDAO had facilitated maybe $30 million worth of loans in the last 30 days. And what that essentially means is 15% of the market is Ethereum, and 15% of the market on a monthly level is worth 30 million. So the market is huge, and the market penetration is roughly 2 to 2.5%. All our efforts have been focused around building a community. So we're active on Reddit, we're active on Steemit, where we have about, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 followers on Twitter. We're really vocal over there, and we're active on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, we have about 500 people who've been testing our product for us to fine-tune it until we go to market. And I'm glad to say that we're actually going to market today. So in the next few hours, you'd see a sign up for the product button instead of sign me up for the early release on the website. Yeah. So this is just a competitive landscape. I would put the typical banks that you would be familiar with in the centralized and not easy or difficult to use, somewhere in the middle. It varies based on bank to bank. And yeah, we're essentially decentralized and easy to use at the same time. All the other firms are either on the protocol layer where you have to talk to them using APIs, or you have to be a coder to use them, or they're completely centralized and they're custodians, completely defeating the point of blockchain. A little bit of background of the team, I guess it's not really important. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's really easy to use. You sign up, you deposit, and you start earning. That's it. 2 clicks. And as a borrower, you deposit, you make a loan request, and it hits your bank in 30 minutes. That's what we do. Thank you so much for your time.
Question?